I'd just like to say that I'm Joy Sperling, and probably very few of you recognize me because you're all new, but I used to teach here. I'm an Emerita professor. I taught art history and visual culture here for years and years. But it is my very great pleasure today to introduce Professor Micaela de Vivero from the Studio Art Department. Professor de Vivero, here, is from the Andean city of Quito in Ecuador. She graduated from the Universidad de San Francisco de Quito, received her MFA from Alfred University in New York. Those of you who know her know that her art practice is grounded in a foundational commitment to transcultural artistic connections. She travels around the world making, installing, and exhibiting her sculpture globally. She not only has an international artistic reputation, exhibiting in some of the most prestigious galleries and museums, winning some of the most prestigious awards and fellowships, but she has attended some of the most famous residencies and has made deep, long-lasting collaborative connections with so many artists from other nations that Denison is indeed very lucky to have her here as a faculty member. Intersectionality suffuses Professor de Vivero's art, although it is based firmly in Latin American decolonial theory. It is suffused with complex, multi-layered meaning, and sometimes brief, fleeting, but profound and deeply imbricated allusions. I think that Stuart Hall describes why a person such as Micaela de Vivero can speak, sing, and write so eloquently. She has learned to inhabit more than one identity, dwell in more than one culture, and speak in more than one language. Her cultural identity is always something, but it is never just one thing. Her identity is always open, complex, under construction, taking part in an unfinished game. She moves into the future through a symbolic detour through the past. With that introduction, I'd like to ask you some questions, Micaela, about this remarkable exhibition, which seems to me to explore a complex cultural identity under construction, as I just said, and to move into the future through a symbolic detour through the past. And my first question is, what is the your primary motivation in making your art?
Thank you, Joy, for this wonderful introduction. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I know that there were other events going on campus, and I was worried when those emails came out, but I'm very glad, I'm very happy to see all of you here. Thank you for this opportunity to Megan and Sam to have my work up here at the Denison Museum. And thank you, Joy, for writing a wonderful catalog for this exhibition. But I will answer your question. So, do you want to repeat it?
Sure, of course. Of course. So, what is the primary motivation when you make your works of art? And maybe I'll ask the second one as well. How do you position yourself as an artist in the world of art?
My primary motivation, and I think this is a great question to ask when you have art students as well present, right, is to communicate the ideas and the experiences that I have. And I think thinking back at my upbringing and my education as an artist, I think when I decided that I wanted to be an artist and when I really became fascinated by the idea of art making was, of course, the making, the materiality, the practice of making art. But then when I discovered that I could have a voice through the art that I would make, that others would listen to my insights through the art that I would make, using art as a communicator was really a big motivator. And it's a different kind of communicator, right? It's not something that directly passes on a message, but it's more suggestive and poetic. And instead of answering questions, maybe it raises more questions. So I think that potential, those two attributes that art has. One of them is being engaged in the making, and the other one is being engaged in asking questions about the questions that you might have yourself, is the power that art has that I really am interested in. How do I see myself as an artist?
Yeah. How do you position yourself in the art world? Where do you know, what are so for instance, your work seems to me to be fundamentally grounded in Latin American decolonial theory. Do you think that's a fair assumption?
Definitely. So I think first and most of all, I see myself as a maker of things. And sculpture is my medium, and thinking and making in the 3 dimensions is something that I think describes the kind of artist that I am. And then definitely where I come from, where I grew up, the Andes in Latin America are part of who I am as an artist, and they talk about the issues that I want to raise with my audience as well. So yeah, definitely the discipline of sculpture, and then also the place where I come from. In Latin America, we are all from mixed origins, right? It's a huge melting pot of all kinds of different people that came from different places at different times. And we continue towards the future and into the contemporary times with that baggage of all our histories, which is what I'm still trying to define, and it gives me more motivation and more material to work with.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us how you translate your positionality into art? How do you translate sort of who you are, where you're from, the kind of ideas that you're thinking about, and how you sort of actually sort of translate those into art as you're making your objects, and what are some of the major and minor themes in your art in general? And why do you include some of these themes in your art?
So some of the major themes in my art are specifically, as you can see in this exhibition, my background as an Andean person, as a person from Latin America. So I have gone deep into research about it that has led me to gather histories, images, experiences that some of them were, or I was already familiar with, but some others were new to me. So it has really been a great motivator for me to learn more. And I think that as an artist, and what is evident in this exhibition is that I don't necessarily only have to articulate my own voice or my own perspective, but the way I have seen my function and my role very clearly for this exhibition is almost like an orchestra director, where I have gathered and sampled from a lot of different sources in order to put them all together to create my discourse, my conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just briefly, before we move on to the exhibition itself, can you talk a little bit about what your favorite or your more favored materials are when you're working in general, and why?
Usually my most favorite materials are the ones that I have just discovered that moment. I think that's part of my identity as an artist as well, right? I rather discover new materials and how they work and how they function rather than staying with something continuously. With that said, still, I think maybe one of the materials that I have come back quite often, and I think it has maybe a controversial existence, is material that comes from animals, like those sculptures that are over there. And as I was just walking into the gallery, May asked me about that material, right? So pig's intestines, yes, this is what they are, is one of my favorite materials. Why? Because they are translucent, they are very delicate, but they are very resistant, and they can create the shape very well. So they are a great sculptural material, but then their presence is almost non-existent, but because of that, it makes it be stronger, which is materials and techniques that I gravitate towards very often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in a way also, they're kind of, they kind of evoke sort of things like parchment and the origins of the materials that people write upon and things like that. So they have they evoke lots of multiple things, which is kind of the basis of all your work, is sort of your work has multiple resonances and multiple layers. So I thought at this point what we might do is that this is a very complicated exhibition that has many parts, and I thought maybe the way that we could move on is to first talk about this series, which sort of anchors the exhibition, and then talk about these pieces, and then open up to the rest of the audience. So this series, we'll talk about this to begin with. This exhibition has several sections that reflect several stages in your artistic conversation, with a number of ideas raised in the exhibition. The first is grounded in your response to an historical letter sent by the Indian writer Qhapaq to the King of Spain in the early 1600s, although he never received it. Can you tell us how you found this document and how and why it became so important to you as a source of inspiration for the first part of the exhibition?
So I have been working with handmade paper for a while. I make handmade paper with my students here since I arrived many years ago. And I had been mixing it up with historic prints in the past, but I was not completely convinced about those historic prints and the way that people in those historic prints were represented. So when I had the chance to think about this exhibition and come up and prepare this exhibition, I definitely wanted to find another document that would represent their people from the Andes in a different way, in a more dignified way. And I had been reading a lot of articles, and I came across some of the images of the Qhapaq document. So like Joy said, the images down here, they are from a letter that the indigenous Felipe Qhapaq de Ayala wrote to the King of Spain. And it said that he finished the letter in 1612 or something like that. And the letter has 1,200 pages and approximately 400 illustrations. So his point, what he wanted to make across, and the importance of this letter to me is that as we think about and learn about history of Latin America, of South America, many of the documents that we have left about what was here before are documents written by the colonizers themselves. So definitely, as we all know, those documents have a bias because they're coming from that perspective, right? So I wanted to have a different voice, and definitely finding this document was mind-blowing because he narrates many of the traditions of the native people. He narrates he gives them dignity, right? If you look at other illustrations that were created in Europe about people from the Americas, many times they're portrayed as savages. They are not wearing clothing. They are cannibals. They have no culture. They have no agriculture. They have no architecture. And here you can see that they are dressed in elaborate dresses that have designs. You can see that there is homes, castles. You can see that they knew how to weave. They definitely kept a good record of their agriculture practices. And spiritual life is represented over here. So the way that the people here are portrayed is in a much more humane way, at the same time that it illuminates traditions and customs that were part of their culture that were lost, and some of them are still lost today. So after finding a few of the images that were referenced in articles, during my trip to Peru in the summer of this past year, I saw that a lot of the museums had different kind of curatorial work, and these images were made reference often. So I finally found the source where I could find the entire book, and it's online. The letter was lost for hundreds of years. It came from Spain to Europe. It never made it to the king, and it was lost for hundreds of years, and then it was found at the Royal Library in Copenhagen, the Danish Royal Library. So who, why, how it made it there, we don't know, but that's where it's housed today. So the entire book is right there on the bench in the back. So when we finish with this talk, you guys can check it out. There's a lot of writing, a lot of images. Thank you, Shahid. And what I have, the illustrations, the images that I have used were the ones that were important for me in this part of the discovery, but there's so much more to work with and so much more to discover. So yeah, I'm just happy to continue with that.
So I think you've sort of answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And it's backtracking a little bit, but how important is it to you as an artist to do research of any kind when you're making a work of art, even if you don't make direct reference to it in your art?
Yes, I mean, as artists, we don't see ourselves as documenters of reality, right? And we all know that there's a lot of subjectivity in art making, and there's a lot of talking about yourself as an artist. Why is it important to conduct research? I think that the world is the best place for us to find inspiration and become critical about things. If we learn about our history, we can learn about ourselves and our future. I think that we face currently challenges in our society, and those current challenges that we face might have been tackled in the past by other people differently. So I think it just informs you, and you can be a creative person, but ideas don't come just from air. Ideas usually come as associations with other ideas that we have learned. So I think the more we know, the more creative we can be, because we can put things together. So definitely, do research before making art, even if you're not addressing it directly.
So these are not just quotations. These are commentaries.
Yeah, and I also, some of them are quotations because for me it was important for me to understand it myself. Like the part of the quipu is the one that is most elaborate. I have a few images of the quipu camayos, the people that would read and write the quipus. And I definitely have some information about the quipu because it was important for me to share it with my audience. If somebody wants to see, wants to learn what this is about, you can read about it. But then definitely, it is through my eyes as an artist, through my experiences. So I have some decisions, made some decisions that are very unique to the way I put it out there for others to read. So for example, the figurines here, the effigies, these are representations of humans, and then these are representations of llamas. Those are objects that are in collections, and they are in collections of Inca artifacts, but the effigies are in reality maybe 1.5 inches tall, right? And there's many, many of those, and they were made in gold, silver, other metals as well. So what is my interpretation by making them bigger and have a more predominant role in this composition? So those kinds of interpretations definitely are my doing, and they go beyond the Guaman Poma illustration, they go beyond the information, factual information that we might have. So they go into the interpretation totally. And Guaman Poma was a wonderful writer, and he was able to articulate things very well, but he definitely had a subjective position as well. So he would create some things that are very interesting that I will probably research for my next exhibition. But he had a position very firmly believed that the Inca world was the center of the world, and everything else around it was functioning around the Inca world system or world view. So he is said to be one of the first decolonial people out there.
So in a way, what you've done is you've taken Wamapomo's sort of world vision and in a way reinterpret it as, not reinterpreted, but infused it with your own worldview. Well, that leads us nicely to this image at the very end here. And And I don't know if you want to get up and take a look at it. It's a tiny image here, or if you want to wait until the end. But there's an image here at the very corner, which is Wamapomo's map of the world from his letter. And my question about this is, how have Wamapomo's letter and imagery anchored this exhibition? And how and in what ways did his ideas resonate? Well, we've already said how they resonate with you. Sorry about that. How did his map of the world, for instance, speak to you specifically as a decolonial statement? And why do you think his, what he wrote and illustrated, why is it so significant today? And I think as a follow-on, I think what's really significant about this exhibition is how this image and the one of Puma City over here, how they work in concert, and how you have moved from this image to this image as an artist.
Thank you for that question. It's really great that you asked me about maps, and maps are so important tool for colonization. And if we think about terrains, locations, geographies, they exist there, and there's people that are living there. But when somebody comes and draws it out and puts a name on that territory, the ownership of the location changes, right? So this is what happened with America. Americo Vespuccio was an Italian who was drawing the map of the Americas, and then the whole continent was called America, right? Alexander von Humboldt, a very famous German naturalist that traveled throughout South America and parts of North America too. He would come and study plants, study animals. All of these were new species for Europeans, but they would make connections with species that they already knew. But what was the first act of colonization, of ownership, was to have somebody draw you in front of that location. What does it mean? I am owning that location, right? Whatever happened prior doesn't really matter. I'm owning it now. So that's why I have taken a couple of maps from historic backgrounds and sampled them into my work. So this one is very interesting because it shows Cusco, the capital of the Inca Empire, as the center of the world. So he's switching history around, right? He's using the tools of the people that came to colonize, but then telling them, well, yes, I'm using your tools, but I'm making the center of the world be me, mine, my people here. And geographically and factually, Cusco, the city of Cusco, that still is a vibrant city to this day, it was the center of the Inca Empire, and it is shaped like a puma. So this was a creation of prior to colonization. So the city of Cusco is there. It's shaped like a puma. The upper part of it is the old city, the Inca city. And the head of the puma is actually a higher elevation, and we don't see the grid over there. It's more organic because that was the ceremonial site. So very well thought out. In between two rivers, we can see the two blue lines that go from the top center to the bottom right, and then again from the middle of the lower part down to the other corner of the paper. So the city of Cusco is geographically located between two rivers. But then what happens when the center of the world is where the communication towards the Inca Empire starts? Because the locations where the break of the page happen, that's where the paths, the Inca Trail, the Qhapaq Ñan, the title of the exhibition, start to give access to the Inca people to all of the Inca Empire, to the north, to the east, to the south, and to the west. So not only maps have a significance in orienting us, but also they represent power, who has the power, who bears the power, and how the power gets claimed by somebody and then gained back maybe by somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to describe why you use the word sampling?
So the way I said that I see that there are so many influences and so many collaborators of this exhibit, at some point I was thinking, is any of this work really mine? I mean, I'm just taking images that somebody else made and putting them in a different context. It's a way of sampling, taking things that already exist in the world, giving them new meaning by putting them close to, in proximity to other things. So the work of an artist is more like the work of a director, of choosing, picking, and putting those things together.
Within this series, there are also several references, 1, 2, 3, 3, in which quipus, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, 3 here in the middle, and then those 2 over there.
And 2 over
have
there.
Quipus too.
Quipus.
Mm-hmm.
Among other things, Qhapaq himself was able to encode quipus, the skill that was reserved only for a very small elite at the time. And his letter contains numerous references to and illustrations of quipus and their makers, many of which you also sample in the series. You also create and refer to a number of quipus in this exhibition, and they're here, and there's one over here. They're all over the place, as you can see. You also create and refer to, a quipu is a series of colored knotted strings which communicate through an abstract three-dimensional encoded text that is actually infinitely more complex than the simple binary code on which our current computer system is based. Can you explain what a quipu is and why it was so significant, first to Qhapaq and then to you in developing this exhibition?
I love fibers. I love working with fibers. I'm teaching my fibers class right now this semester. And I have always tried to learn new techniques of putting pieces of fibers together to create shape, to have control of the shape that you create, to color. And this is another really important reason why you should do research, right? Because if you learn from others and how others have learned, then you can apply it into your own work. So quipus, I learned about quipus a year ago. And it has been completely life-changing for me because I have been able to understand that a culture was able to communicate, to document, to take decisions based on the information that was on quipus. And even though we might think that we are very advanced in the way that we function now with computers and having information go from one place to another, still the quipus, even though they were created so much time ago, they have so many of these same characteristics, right? So quipus are pieces made out of string, and with knots, through knots, they communicate not only numbers, but also narration. The numbers we have been able to decode. We know what knot signifies 1, what knot signifies 2, what knot signifies 10. I mean, 1, 5, and 10 are decimal system. But then there's a lot of evidence that also tells us that quipus were also hosting narratives, but we have not been able to decode those narratives, and we will probably never do because the people that used to use them are no longer here. So in a way, I was trying to understand how they were made in order for me to be able to replicate them. And I was reading a lot of descriptions and scholarly essays about the reading of the quipu, but how to make them was not really described in the scholarly information that I was finding. So it took me all the way to go and see the quipus. I have seen some quipus, there's many more, to be able to understand. So for example, in which direction you twist the fiber at the time of creating your thread has a meaning, right? You make it into, you twist it to the left or to the right. And that concept I could not understand. I was like, it's just over my head. I cannot understand. How is it that twisting to one side or twisting to the other side? And eventually, as I was making them, I started realizing that, yes, you can twist to the one side or to the other, right? So I understood that. And then the color coding, colors also have a different kind of significance. And then there might be different colors within other colors that also carry a significance. So it's not only the objects themselves, but in association to what other things they are. So another thing that really was striking to me was, of course, the information that the quipus carried, but then how the quipus were so portable. So we think about a quipu being rolled up just like this, and then put in somebody's purse, in a chasqui purse, And then this chasqui needed to run from point A to point E on the Inca Trail on the Qhapaq Ñan for it to ultimately go from one leader, from one governor to another governor, so people could read them, know what's going on, and take decisions based on that. So that information and how the empire was really being held together, not only by the roads that were connecting it, but by the information that was being carried on the roads. The importance of that was something that I was hoping that through replicating those ways of making, they could have the objects that I create, even though those are new objects that I have made with new materials, they can have some of that same spirituality or connection with people.
Exactly, yeah. So, so extending the concept of the qipu as an abstracted, portable form of encoded and communication, can you talk a little bit about how the qipu has become part of a larger theme for this entire exhibition that includes a whole communication infrastructure that extends to the royal roads, the runners carrying the qipus on those roads. And by the way, as you mentioned, the runners would run for so many miles, and so a qipu could actually travel up to 200 miles a day using selected runners, and they could reach Cusco in a matter of days, which was phenomenal. Include the runners, the encoders, the readers, and so on, across the Andean world in the 16th century. And in a way, that system of communication has not been bettered conceptually or structurally, even today. Really, the only things that have happened today is that the speed and the technology is different. Why do you think that is so central to your whole exhibition?
The qipu?
No, the infrastructure of communication.
I think because it is so important for us today too, right? And just to think that 500, 600 years ago, people were not much less advanced than us is revelatory. And also to think about these objects nowadays being seen as having a lot of aesthetic attributes. So making communication, information, decision-making based on aesthetically important objects maybe is the highlight of an artist, right? When art becomes this first element that you go and look for when you're looking for information and decision-making.
That's beautiful. Thank you, thank you. And then I think we move on to this, which is really the sort of the climax of this exhibition in many ways. The individual concepts and ideas that we've talked about this far are critical to your work, but in these larger sculptures, they take on not just a much more conceptually complex, abstracted form, but a much grander physical presence. These very large sculptures seem to bring together all of the issues that we've discussed previously into a grander, more overarching narrative. They take on your earlier discussions about place and space, about means and systems of communication in Andean culture, about the sense of the height of the mountains, the sense, as you once said to me on one occasion, of locating yourself within that space, looking down from great heights, but also looking up into a future unbounded, of vast spaces of the royal roads that wove and weave along the spine of the Andes, connecting the far reaches of Andean culture with all kinds of wealth, of gold and silver, of the land and its peoples and its complex systems of communication, to mention but a few. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ideas embodied in these large works so that people can get an inkling of how complex they really are?
So there are two main ideas in this exhibition, and those two main ideas are based and anchored in history. So one of them was, of course, the qipu, right? My understanding of the qipu, and then articulating it into a contemporary art form, making it become something that is relevant to me. And then the other historic reference that is very present in this exhibition is the Qhapaq Ñan, which means the Inca Trail. The Inca Trail is a connection of roads that to this day exists in South America, and it is roughly 25,000 kilometers, which is a lot of kilometers. But geographically, if you think it connects Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Chile and Argentina. So pretty much it connects the whole South America, this road that was built so long ago, and it's all gravel and stone. And I wanted to replicate this experience that I had walking on the Inca Trail on the Qhapaq Ñan for 4 days this past summer, and the way that not only it was important for the empire to succeed, to have this interconnectedness, but also it was part of the reason why it was destroyed, and it was a reason for its doom. That the colonizers later on came and used these same roads to transport and extract all the gold and the silver to the coast and then ship them to Europe. So there is this both an intention to make them be beautiful and us to be able to look at them, but at the other end also there's an increased sadness to the situation, right? So I wanted to create a piece that makes reference to the Inca Road. That's why I covered it with gold and silver leaf, because that's the reason why those peoples and that empire are not part of us anymore. But then the infrastructure was still there and laid for us all to be able to see it and use it. I was hoping with this work too that people feel inclined to not only get closer but also be able to walk through. The combination of the quipus on the lines that represent the Inca roads to me are this connection that the quipu and the Inca road had. So that's why we have some of them throughout the installation. But there's also geographic or locations that I was thinking of, right? The silver part is probably the most amount that we have is silver, and that's what, because the extraction of silver in tons was bigger than the extraction of gold. But then the gold in two parts, in this part over here, it's showing 4 directions, just like the 4 directions on the Puma, right? We have 4 pieces of wood here that are bent, one pointing to the north, the other one pointing to the south, to the east, and to the west, the 4 directions of the Inca Empire on the Inca Trail, and same here, right? We have north, south, east, and west. So the connection of the roads to the cardinal places in the map or in the world, and how that interconnectedness could serve for transporting information, goods, but then also for the extraction and the abuse of that region.
So I want to ask, how do you bring all of these complex ideas, and I know there are a lot more ideas involved in this piece, how do you bring all of these ideas into such a comprehensive whole? In other words, how do you make such a large sculpture? And by that I mean, how do you go about conceptualizing, planning, and creating such a large piece of sculpture? By that I don't mean just making a big object, I mean creating such an intellectually large, complex, and multi-layered piece of work. And I guess I'm trying to say, not just creating something, but creating something that isn't like a million cluttered details. How do you edit out the details to create something that is, that communicates directly with so many layers of meaning?
I think an important, crucial part is to lay out your research, do a lot of research, have experiences. This is edited out, right? I could have made 10 different exhibitions with the amount of information that I gathered this past summer as I was traveling in Peru. So put your priorities in. And I think artwork always is created, and there's 2 different very important influences that need to be working in parallel and then intersect at times, right? So one of them for the creation of artwork is, what materials do you like to use? what things do you like to make, what processes do you like to be engaged in. And in my case, definitely it is this physicality that I'm interested in. I could not have done this piece, first of all, without help. My helper is in the audience there somewhere. She was there just a minute ago. And also, on a desk, I could not have made this art piece, right? So I have to be putting the glue on the wood and then bending it as I'm standing and pulling these rubber bands. There's something about that physicality that I like to do. So engaging in processes that you like to make as an artist will always make you justify those processes. So the physicality of it, the materials, what the materials do. I like that these lines that are created are very ethereal. They almost look like they are just floating in space, and they look like they are moving right now, even though I know that they are very hard and stiff at this point, but they don't create that illusion. They create a very different illusion. So I'm interested in making them in the effect that they have. So these are all very abstract concepts that not necessarily carry with them another idea that would make reference to history. And then there's the other parallel research that happens, the location I went to, the culture I'm looking at, the history of them, and then I'm trying to merge them. And I think there might be many tries that are unsuccessful of artists trying to merge things, and those are the ideas that you leave behind in the process. So lots of editing, definitely. And then I always tell my students about the tool set that you set up for yourself and the things that you learn how to make, and those usually come back later, and you usually learn what they can signify and the meaning that they can carry as you work with those processes and materials later. So long answer for that question.
No.
And there's not just one specific answer either. So,
no, of course. No, but I think it was. I think it's important. I think what you said about the merging of the physicality of making the work and the intellectual aspect of making the work. But you once said that in some ways you're aspiring to the sublime.
oh yeah, I said that.
Yes. And I think there is something very sublime.
Yes, I always tell the story that when I came to interview here at Denison 20 years ago, one of the architectural sites that really captivated me was this gallery and the height of the ceiling. I have always loved the height of the ceiling. And whenever artists have different motivations to make work, but for me, one of the motivations to make work is stand in front of it and say, ah. So it's a reference to the sublime, right? Definitely I look for that effect in the work that I create.
And I have just one final question.
Yeah.
And that is, but I think you've answered it. And that is, how important is process for you?
I think process informs the meaning of the work, so it's extremely important. And I try not to always negate or hide the process. So if there are imperfections in the making of things, they will stay there, because I think it's important to show that how they were made and not necessarily that they were created in a vacuum. The process of making work is probably one of the most satisfying parts of making the work.
So you're cultivating the work, both intellectually and, in a way, subliminally.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
well, thank you. Shall we open it up to the audience
Yes,
to see
let's
if they
do
have
that.
some questions? Does anyone have any questions?
Marla.
You may have said this, and I'm sorry, but the Qhapaq, is that the...
Ooh, it's an interactive piece. Yeah.
Do yours say something?
Oh, this is a very good question. So Marla is asking if the quipus that I have made have some information decoded. And I was telling another group that I talked to today earlier that in my mind, I was going to use the summer to travel and to make quipus, because I feel that working in fiber comes very natural to me, and I could work in fiber traveling because you can just fold them up, put them in a suitcase, and come from one place to another. So as I was traveling and learning about the quipus, I really got into trying to understand the quipu, and I was not able to make any during the summer as my plan was, because I thought I needed to understand them more. So the first quipu I made is the one that is rolled up right there. And that one does, each one of the strings has a different number, and all those numbers are in the hundreds. The same with the two quipus that are here, this quipu over here, and then this quipu over here. Each one of the strings has numbers, and all those numbers are in the hundreds. But then the time for the show came closer, and I decided I cannot be able to understand everything I'm making, because I was able to see other quipus that were historical, that were not respecting this numerical system that I was understanding. So definitely they had another system that I wasn't aware of. So I decided to go with that artistic freedom, and the other ones that are the bigger ones are purely aesthetic, and they have no meaning. Actually, the one that is there by the entrance and the colorful over here, these two are unwritten quipus. They have no knots. And there have also been some unwritten quipus found in graves and places like that, where we know that there was some information going on them, or there was information that had been erased. So right now, some of them mean something, but I would not really claim that they're legitimately telling a story. They are more my own artistic interpretation.
Micaela?
Yeah.
First off, just such a beautiful show, and we're so lucky to have it here in our museum, but also, you know, I think speaking for colleagues and students, how lucky we are to have you in our midst. And then thinking about the show and hearing the story of making the work, I think about our own proximity to the UNESCO site that is the Indian Mounds, and how that was also a big system that connected people. And so my question to you is maybe more of an emotional one, is thinking of you having come here from there, has this show and its roads led you feeling closer to that place or further away from that place?
It has made me want to go back to that place. I think I am closer because I understand so many other things and more things that I couldn't understand when I was living there. And I think that is something interesting that happens when you take distance of something or a place or a situation, that you can sometimes understand it much better. So I think I have a more clarity of thought in understanding. I'm closer emotionally, but if I would go and live there, I would need to spend some time just being used to being in that place. Yeah.
Because it is interesting, right, in this world of communication and emails, that we can go away but not feel very far away, right? So I think the show also kind of expresses this idea of interconnectedness, maybe something what Joy was saying as well, like our relationships to places and the paths that lead us back and forth.
Yeah, definitely.
So, one of the things that the prehistoric people in Licking County were known for was flint. And that was very widely traded for things like obsidian. What sort of trading activities did the pre-Columbian people do in
Great. Obsidian was important there too, and it's a volcanic region, so obsidian is of volcanic origin. There was a lot of obsidian trading happening in the Andes in earlier times, but then also there are particular shells that were transported from the coast to the high Andes, and those were almost used like currency. And weavings, fibers had a very esteemed place in society, even more so than gold, and they were used for trading as well. So gold was not necessarily used for trading, but it was used to towards honoring deities. So it was used as part of architecture and creating small effigies, but more in a way to honor the gods rather than trading, which is very interesting, right? Mm-hmm. Yes? Cutting knives, yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can tell that you're definitely passionate about history.
Uh-huh.
I'm a history major, and I was just curious. I'm taking some classes here that probably aren't offered in other places, like interdisciplinary, like environmental history classes. I took one about Latin America, and it allowed me to see things differently, seeing it through the perspective, a historical lens of like environmental activism and activity.
Yeah.
Do you think that history students would benefit from seeing history through a lens of art and art production?
I think definitely yes. I think the reach that you have as an artist is wider. There's more people that will come and see artifacts or objects or sculptures or paintings rather than reading a very long paper. And I think it also creates a bigger audience for those themes, right? So just by me being here working with Joy, with Megan, with Sam, they have all done so much research and learned about the region that I'm interested in just because I was interested in it and I was making artwork out of it. So it's a great entry point towards deepening more of that understanding and that knowledge. Yeah. Anna.
You mentioned that there's a lot of them staying in shells for costume trading and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a specific reason that you decided not to utilize any of those materials in the show?
So when I came back from my trip, there were so many possibilities, right? And I had to do some choices and choose some things over others. Yeah. Sometimes I think maybe going back to what you know how to do or what really attracts you how to do, then I go back to that. I could have decided to build a temple made out of stone here, right? But I decided not to because I'm not a stone sculptor and I don't do that kind of work. So those are all decisions that you take as an artist. And sometimes the nice thing is that you don't have to justify those decisions to anyone other than you. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I'd just like to say is that this working with Micaela on this exhibition was actually a real honor for me. And as someone who works on a lot of contemporary art, it involved a lot of research for me because I'm not a Latin American specialist and really knew very little about the region or the history of the region. So it involved a lot of research. And that's actually one of the beauties of being an art historian is that you have to become an expert on things that you don't know anything about very quickly. But I think one of the things that was really profound for me was in learning about sort of different identities and different histories of different peoples, is that deep down, we all understand the same things. Mm-hmm. And, for those of you who are students, it's like you come to Denison and you're dislocated. You come from your homes, you come to college, and in a way, you're all sort of rediscovering who you are. You're creating new identities. And in a way, it's sort of like Wamapomo. Mm-hmm. He wrote a letter to the King of Spain, telling the King of Spain who he was, and all about his nation, all about his identity, who he was. And he goes on and on for hundreds of pages about all the people who he grew up with, all the people in his country, and how wonderful his country was, and described the quipus, described the culture in detail to someone who knew nothing about it. And, you know, I kept thinking, how would I describe where I came from to someone who knew nothing about it? And I think, you know, for those of you who are students, you know, I ask the question, how would you do the same thing? And I think that's one of the things that I think you can really take away from an exhibition such as this. You know, look at these objects and think, you know, how can I place myself in Micaela's position? How would you describe the history of where you're from? You know, place yourself in the position of Micaela. Place yourself in the position of Homo. Make it personal. Because that's what I tried to do. And it was a profound experience. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great. Yeah.
I was watching some YouTube videos about Peru, and of course, a lot of it was geared toward kids. So the people were very. What struck me about the Peruvian was that they are extremely warm-hearted, and it also seemed to me that the Peruvian people and the llamas have something in common.
I don't know if we have something in common, but that the Latin American are very warm people. That's something that everybody knows. Yes, we are very warm, especially with people that come visit. We are the most welcoming and friendly always, yes.
And has that always been true? I mean, even during, let's say, the Inca period? Because let's say that they always had llamas somewhere in their depictions of everyday life.
The llamas were a sacred animal, and they carried a lot of significance. But they were also, I mean, they were a source of clothing with the wool. They were a source of meat. They also ate llama. And then they were also an animal that was a utility animal for agriculture and carrying things and moving things around. So the relationship of people from the Andes with the llama is so vast and extends, right? Sheep were imported or brought in with colonization. Those were not animals that were there before. The llamas are very well acclimated to high altitudes and to be able to walk on those terrains without necessarily creating deforestation. So, yeah.
Getting to know you. So this might be something we've talked about before, but can you talk about your interest in handmade paper and as a material? Because I'm thinking of it as sort of massive fibers alongside the other fibers, and there's this sort of interpretation that I'm getting of the desire for communication to leave you and go out and live beyond this. Is that something you think about with the material?
I love making handmade paper. I love making everything that is in this exhibition. And in all my classes, we make things that are here in this exhibition, right? And handmade paper is one of those. So I think it is not only a surface for putting images on or writing on, but then also it can be a sculptural surface if you put it in molds. So I guess the use that I have given to the handmade paper here is one, but there's so many other uses. And throughout history, if I would do another research trip to another place where paper is very important in the history, I might come up with other ways of making paper and using paper and applying paper to artistic creation. So it's one of those materials and processes that has been with humanity since the beginning. So yeah, maybe it's another research project.
Yeah, it feels kind of ancient but new at the same time in this space.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody.